A large portion of the Jewish nation has returned to its homeland, but the heart, soul, and mind of much of the Jewish nation are still in exile mode. This state of affairs must and will inevitably change. This is Torah Nation TV from Jerusalem, and we are speaking with the head of Machon Shilo, Rabbi David Bar-Hayim. Shalom, Rabbi Bar-Hayim.
Shalom.
With municipal elections in Israel approaching, there has been much discussion in some quarters about whether one is required to follow the instructions of rabbis before voting in municipal or national elections. Does the Rav have any comments?
This claim that we frequently hear, namely that a Jew has to follow what is often referred to as Daas Torah, that is to say, the opinion of Torah sages, is a rather tendentious and problematic claim, and I will explain why. First of all, if we look at the sources from Hazal, we do not have any clear indication at all in those sources that at our present point in history that a Jew is required to follow this or that rabbi or this or that group of rabbis. In fact, in all the classic halachic sources, the only source, the only book that one can point to that claims that the Jewish people are required to follow, just as they were required to follow the view of the Sanhedrin in its day, when the Sanhedrin, being the Beit Din HaGadol, the highest Beit Din of the Jewish people, reached a decision on a certain matter, the entire Jewish people are required to follow that opinion. That is certainly true. But what about after the period of the Sanhedrin, and the time when there is no Sanhedrin, where there are many rabbis, many Chachamim, many great Chachamim, with different points of view? That is already something much less clear. We have one source, namely Sefer HaChinuch, a book written during the period of the Rishonim, written by a Talmid of the Rashba, who says that we are required to follow the view of Torah sages in all generations. The Sefer HaChinuch is clearly basing himself on the concept of following the Sanhedrin in its decisions and applying that and using that logic for future generations. Now, this in itself is not only reasonable, but I would say, in fact, an essential tenet of Torah Judaism. There is no question that there is such a thing as Da'at Torah. In other words, there is clearly such a thing as people who have studied Torah for many years, usually for their whole lives, people who are immersed in Torah and therefore are imbued with the spirit of the Torah and the knowledge of the Torah. It is clear that such people are able to see many aspects of reality and to see down the road, to see how things will play out, what the effect of taking this course of action or not taking that course of action might be. This is entirely true and is only to be expected. And this is in fact what we find in the first halakha or the first mishnah of the sixth perek of Masechet Avot, which is an additional chapter that was added to the original 5 chapters of the Masechet. There, Rabbi Meir states, Kol ha-lomed Torah lishma, anyone who studies Torah lishma for its own sake, for the sake of heaven, in order to understand Hashem's Torah and to understand the will of Hashem, in other words, for the right reasons, for the positive reasons and motivations, and not for extraneous motivations, such a person, if he treads in that path for a long time and is blessed with understanding and talent, etc., he will be zochel lidvarim harbe. He will be able to reach a very high level. And it goes on to say that nehenim imenu aitza v'tushia, that people will be able to benefit from hearing the words of advice and suggestion and recommendation that such a person will be able to give them. It goes on to say, Eitza v'tushia bina ugvura. In other words, such a person knows how to give the right advice in many situations. Tushia refers to recommendations and knowing how to deal with a certain situation, when it is necessary to be active or passive, whether it's necessary to adopt a certain approach or another approach. Bina and Gvura refer to wisdom and a certain strength of character, gumption. These are some of the things, some of the qualities that this Mishnah refers to as being the lot of true and great Talmidei Chachamim. And there is therefore no doubt that any Jew who takes his Torah Judaism seriously should be interested in knowing the views of such people. The problem, however, of course, is that not all issues, not all questions fall within the purview of the Torah. Not all issues have even an indirect connection to any kind of Torah issue or value or set of considerations. And second of all, even when it does come to an issue that perhaps may have such a connection in some way to the Torah, seeing that we are talking here not about matters of halakha, and even there, of course, we know that there are many different views on many different halachot in the Torah, and this surprises no one. We all know that in the Mishnah we have Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir, and in the Talmud we have discussions and differences of opinion almost ad infinitum, and the same is true down to the present day. No one denies any of this. How much more so when we are dealing with issues which are not clear-cut, black and white issues of Torah. How much more so can we expect to find different opinions between different Talmidei Chachamim? It is unreasonable to assume that all such people will always adopt the same position when one considers the different considerations, the different facts and issues that may play a part in arriving at such a decision or such a recommendation. And therefore, even if we take the words of Sefer HaChinuch, that we must follow the words of Torah sages and their advice and their direction in all generations down to the present time, when it comes to issues which involve what we call in Hebrew hashkafot olam, that is to say different world outlooks, views, philosophies, different approaches, when it comes to issues which are not clearly mentioned in the Torah or in the Halakha, one can expect to find, which is exactly what we do find, of course, that different Chachamim have different approaches and may see the reality from a different perspective as compared to one of their colleagues. And therefore, to use the term Daas Torah, or Daas Torah, or Daas Torah, referring to this kind of issue, is tendentious and misleading, and of course is being done with a particular halachic or very often political angle in mind, for often by a party that has a certain axe to grind or a certain benefit they are trying to accrue to themselves.
Some people claim that it is forbidden, according to halakha, to vote for a candidate who is not Sabbath observant. Is this claim true?
I can tell you, first of all, I recall many years ago, it was in 1981, Tafshin Mem Aleph, I was sitting in a shiur being given by Harav Tzvi Yehuda Kook, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, the son of Rav Kook, And this was a short while before elections were to take place in Israel. And you will recall that this was some months before the withdrawal from the Sinai. And because the Mafdal, the National Religious Party, which Rav Tzvi Kook had always supported for decades and told his students to vote for, had come down in favor of the Camp David Accords, someone in the shiur asked Rav Tzvi Kook, and as I say, I was present, I heard this and saw this exchange with my own eyes and with my own ears. Someone asked him, is it mutar, is it permissible to vote for the Tchiyah party? The Tchiyah party was a right-wing party, not a religious party. All except one member of that party, all except one person running for the Knesset under that party were not religious people, and yet they were amongst the few who opposed the Camp David Accords. That was the question. Rav Tzvi Kook did not answer immediately. He sat there thinking for, I would say, about a minute, and the room was in total silence, and people were tense and eager to hear what he had to say. And after about 1 minute, he said, yes, it is mutar to vote for the Tchiyah party. From this alone, one can see that, on the one hand, Rav Tzvi Kook, following in his father's footsteps, did not truly like the idea of voting for non-religious candidates and politicians who would then go on to play a role in public affairs, in Am Yisrael's affairs. But he was also fully aware of the facts and realities, and he understood that in this particular set of circumstances it was necessary and correct, or at least possible, to adopt the view. He didn't say, by the way, one should vote for the Tchiyah party. He said it's permissible to do so. He understood that in this situation there would be an argument to vote for another kind of candidate. And the same is true in any national or municipal election. There are always considerations on both sides of the barricade for which candidate or for which party to vote. And because politics as they exist today in Israel, and in many countries for that matter, are very involved and convoluted, and one has to take into account many possible ramifications of supporting this or that candidate or this or that party, the question is not at all a simple one. And therefore the claim that I saw recently made by another rabbi that according to Rav Kook it is forbidden to vote for an irreligious candidate who will then be in charge of public funds and public affairs, we see from this anecdote that I just related involving his son that this is true in some situations, but not true in all situations. And therefore, if a person feels that, looking at the big picture, it is correct and reasonable to vote for a candidate or a party who is likely to act in a certain way or prevent certain things from happening, even though they may not be ideal in all respects, even though they may not be religious at all, it is definitely possible to do so, having taken into account all aspects and all considerations. It is true that in an ideal world, in a perfect world, we would want to see only God-fearing religious Jews who keep Shabbat and keep all the mitzvot, running the affairs of the Jewish people. That certainly would be the ideal. But on the other hand, to claim that it is forbidden to vote for anyone who does not fit that description is actually simply adopting the position of the Satmar Hasidim. That is exactly why Satmar Hasidim will tell you that you may not vote in any type of election, national or municipal, in Israel, because you are voting for Jews and you are putting into position, you are putting into power a government, a coalition, a party, an individual who is not a Torah Jew who doesn't believe in the Torah, who doesn't believe in God, etc., etc. And this is unfortunately true, without a doubt. And it's true even if you vote for a religious party, even if you vote for a Haredi party, this is true. And that's exactly why Satmar say that you can't vote even for a Haredi party, because everyone knows, for example, in a national election in Israel, and for that matter in municipal elections as well, even if you vote for a Haredi party, the eventual governing coalition will involve possibly the Haredi party that you voted for, the religious party you voted for. It will also involve other people, other individuals who are not of a religious background or persuasion at all, because that is simply the way of the world. That is the reality. The reality is that in Israel at this point, everything, national affairs, municipal affairs, are conducted by governing coalitions made up of different factions and groups with different interests, and one has to live with that reality and work within that reality. In general, the Torah is not a theory with which one can simply retreat to one's ivory tower and look from far above the fray from one's ivory tower, look down and say to oneself, "Tut tut," and be thankful that you have nothing to do with what's going on. That is not a true Torah perspective. It is not a practical position, and it's not, by the way, the position of the vast majority, almost one could say the overwhelming majority of Talmidei Chachamim, whether they be national religious or Haredi in persuasion. We all know that, for example, the vast majority of Haredi Jews in Israel do vote in municipal and in national elections. So to sum this up, to speak of Daas Torah in this context is misleading and intellectually dishonest. A Jew has to be responsible for his actions, and a Jew must use his powers, his faculty of reason and logic in his understanding of the issues. And if he's convinced that this is an issue which it clearly involves and requires expert Torah knowledge, then yes, he should turn to his Rav, his spiritual mentor, as the Mishnah says in Masechet Avot, Aseh lecha Rav, and ask him what his take on this particular issue might be. But not every political decision and not every election involves such issues, and a Jew, in the final analysis, has to think for himself and act accordingly.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the Rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the Rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.